The hook and intro. Imagine walking into a place you haven't seen in decades, expecting just a quick hit of nostalgia. But instead, you find the one person who changed your life, still there, still grinding, still invisible to everyone but you. That's what happened to Tony Stark, the billionaire genius behind Iron Man, when he stepped back into his old high school in Brooklyn, New York. This isn't just a story about a superhero. It's about a guy who thought he'd seen it all, fame, fortune, saving the world, until one ordinary man reminded him what really matters. Tony Stark, the guy who built an empire, found himself face to face with a past he'd buried and a debt he could never repay. By the end of this, you'll be wiping tears and rethinking who the real heroes are in your life. So stick with me. This one's gonna hit hard. Tony Stark wasn't supposed to be in Brooklyn that day. He was due at a Stark Industries gala in Manhattan, all glitz and champagne, but something pulled him back to James Madison High School. Maybe it was the weight of turning 50, or maybe it was just a whim. Either way, he ditched his driver, told his assistant Pepper to push the gala, and walked through the faded blue doors of his old school. The place smelled like floor polish and teenage dreams, just like it did 35 years ago when he was a scrawny kid with big ideas and bigger problems. Back then, Tony was nobody. Not a billionaire, not a hero, just a nerdy kid who's got shoved into lockers and mocked for his oversized glasses. School was rough. He'd hide in the computer lab, tinkering with circuit boards, trying to drown out the taunts. But there was one guy who saw him, one guy who made it bearable. And now, all these years later, Tony was about to find him again, still sweeping the same floors, still fighting his own quiet battles. What do you think it's like to see someone who saved you when you were at your lowest? Still stuck in the same place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. Problem and early development. Tony Stark stood in the main hallway of James Madison High School, the echoes of his footsteps bouncing off the chipped tile floors. It was after hours, the classrooms empty, but the place felt alive with ghosts of his past. He could almost see himself at 15, awkward, glasses slipping down his nose, dodging bullies who thought he was an easy target. Back then, he wasn't Iron Man, he was just Tony, the kid who'd rather talk to computers than people. And every day was a battle to survive. He wandered toward the old computer lab, the place where he'd built his first circuit board, where he'd dreamed of changing the world. That's when he heard it, the soft scrape of a broom against the floor. Around the corner, an older man was sweeping up what looked like spilled soda from a vending machine. His movements were slow, deliberate, like every step cost him something. Tony froze. The man's gray janitor uniform was faded, but Tony would have recognized that hunched silhouette anywhere. It was Frank Russo, the guy who'd been the school's janitor when Tony was a kid. The guy who'd saved him, time and time again, without ever saying a word. "Mr. Russo?" Tony's voice came out softer than he meant, like he was 15 again. The old man turned, his weathered face creasing with surprise. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, locked onto Tony's. "Well, I'll be damned," Frank said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Tony Stark, you're a long way from the computer lab, kid." Tony laughed, but it caught in his throat. Frank was 80 now, maybe older, his hands gnarled from years of work, his back bent from decades of sweeping these same halls. And yet, here he was, still cleaning up after kids, still invisible to the world. "You're still here?" Tony asked, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Frank shrugged, leaning on his broom like it was holding him up. "Where else would I go? This place is home. Been here 50 years, seen kids like you come and go." Tony did the math in his head. 50 years. Frank had been here before Tony was even born, mopping floors, fixing leaks, watching generations pass through. And Tony remembered how Frank used to show up, like some quiet guardian whenever the bullies got too close. He'd sweep near the computer lab, humming an old Sinatra tune, giving Tony a safe space to breathe. Back then, Tony thought it was just chance. Now he wasn't so sure. "Why didn't you retire?" Tony asked, his voice tighter than he expected. Frank's smile faded a bit. "Retire on what? A janitor's pension barely covers my rent, let alone the pills for my knees." He tapped his leg, wincing. "Gotta keep moving, Tony. Keeps me young, you know?" But Tony saw the pain in his eyes, the kind you can't hide. This man, who'd been there for him when no one else was still fighting to get by, still carrying the weight of a job that never paid him what he was worth. Have you ever met someone who gave you everything and got nothing in return? Someone who changed your life, but the world forgot them? Share your story in the comments. It means a lot to hear from you. Deepening the story. Tony Stark couldn't shake the image of Frank Russo, 80 years old, still pushing a broom down the halls of James Madison High School. The guy who'd been his quiet protector back when Tony was just a kid getting slammed into lockers was now fighting bad knees and a bank account that barely kept the lights on. It hit Tony like a punch to the gut. Here he was, a billionaire with the world at his feet, while Frank was stuck in the same place, invisible to everyone but the kids he'd saved over the years. "Let's grab a coffee, Mr. Russo," Tony said, his voice steadier now, but his mind racing. Frank raised an eyebrow, leaning his broom against the wall. "Coffee with Tony Stark? You sure you got time for an old janitor?" Tony grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "For you? Always." They ended up in Frank's tiny office, a cramped room tucked behind the school's boiler. It smelled like cleaning supplies and old books with a single flickering bulb overhead. Frank poured coffee into two chipped mugs, one with a faded Brooklyn Dodgers logo. "Still take it black?" he asked, handing Tony a cup. Tony nodded, stunned. "You remember that?" Frank chuckled, easing into a wobbly chair. "I remember all my kids. You used to stay late in that computer lab, working on those crazy gadgets. I'd slip you coffee to keep you going." Tony sat across from him, the mug warm in his hands. Memories flooded back, nights when he'd lose himself in wiring diagrams, trying to escape the bullies and his own doubts. Frank would always be there, sweeping nearby, never saying much, but always watching out. "You were there for me," Tony said quietly. "When those jerks were on my case, you'd show up, like you knew. I never thanked you." Frank waved it off, his hands rough from years of work. "Just doing my job, kid. Somebody had to look out for you dreamers." But Tony wasn't letting it go. "Why are you still here, Frank? You're 80. You should be retired, living easy." Frank's face tightened, and he looked out the small, grimy window at the school courtyard. "Tried retiring once. Didn't stick. My pension's a joke, and my daughter in Chicago's got her own bills. Besides, these kids?" He pointed toward the empty halls. "They keep me going. Somebody's got to be here for the ones who get lost." Tony's chest ached. Frank wasn't just talking about cleaning floors. He was talking about kids like Tony had been, scared, alone, needing someone to see them. Then Frank pulled out an old leather-bound book from a shelf, its pages yellowed and worn. "Take a look," he said, sliding it across the desk. Tony opened it, and his heart stopped. It was a journal filled with Frank's neat handwriting, stories of kids he'd helped over 50 years. No names, just moments. A girl who cried in the stairwell, a boy who needed someone to listen, and then entries from the late 80s about a skinny kid with big glasses who built gadgets and got picked on. Tony's throat tightened. That was him. Frank had seen him even back then, when Tony felt like nobody did. Has someone ever noticed you when you thought you were invisible? Maybe a teacher, a neighbor, or even a janitor? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious to hear your stories. Building toward the climax. Tony Stark sat in Frank Russo's tiny office, the old janitor's journal open in front of him. Each page was a punch to the heart. Stories of kids Frank had quietly helped over 50 years, written in his careful handwriting. Tony's own story was there too, the skinny kid with big glasses who hid in the computer lab, dreaming of inventions while dodging bullies. Frank had seen him, protected him, believed in him when Tony didn't believe in himself. And now at 80, Frank was still here, sweeping floors, his knees shot, his bank account empty, like none of it ever mattered. Tony closed the book, his hands shaking a little. "You kept this for all these years," he said, his voice low. "All these kids." "We die." Frank leaned back in his creaky chair, the Brooklyn Dodgers mug still steaming in his hand. "Somebody had to remember them," he said simply. "The ones who got overlooked. They're the ones who changed the world. Like you did, Tony." The words hit harder than Tony expected. He'd built Stark Industries, saved the planet as Iron Man. But sitting here, he felt like that scared kid again, wondering why someone like Frank cared. "You shouldn't be here," Tony said, almost angry now. "You should be retired, living good, not killing yourself for a paycheck that doesn't even cover your rent." Frank's eyes softened, but there was pain there too. "My wife Rosie used to say the same thing," he said, his voice catching. "She passed 12 years ago. Cancer ate up what little we saved. My daughter in Chicago, she's got her own family to worry about. This job," he gestured at the cramped room, the worn broom in the corner, "it's all I got left." Tony's jaw clenched. Frank had given everything, his time, his health, his heart, and the world had given him nothing back. Then Frank reached into a rusty metal cabinet and pulled out a package wrapped in faded brown paper, tied with twine. "Found this in the trash back in '89, he said, handing it to Tony. "You threw it out, but I knew it was special." Tony's fingers fumbled as he unwrapped it. Inside were yellowed sheets covered in his teenage handwriting, sketches of a battery system for an electric car, complete with cooling channels and charge controllers. He'd tossed it, frustrated, thinking it was a failure. But Frank had seen something else. "You were always working on big stuff," Frank said, a faint smile breaking through. "I figured you'd need this someday." Tony stared at the papers, his throat tight. Those sketches weren't just doodles. They were the spark of ideas that later built Stark Industries' tech empire. Frank had saved a piece of his future, back when Tony couldn't see it himself. And now this man who'd changed his life was stuck in a crumbling office, barely getting by, while Tony had everything. It wasn't right, it wasn't fair, and Tony Stark wasn't about to let it stay that way. Ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself? Maybe they saved something, a drawing, a letter, a dream, that meant more than you knew. Share it in the comments. Your stories keep this channel alive, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay with us. The climax begins. Tony Stark stood in Frank Russo's cramped office, clutching the faded sketches of his teenage battery designs, like they were a lifeline to the past. Those yellowed pages, saved from the trash by a janitor who believed in him, weren't just paper. They were proof of everything Frank had done for him. And now Tony looked at Frank, 80 years old, his knees wrecked from decades of scrubbing floors, his life savings gone to his wife's cancer bills, and felt something snap inside. This wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. And Tony Stark didn't let wrong stand. "I'm not letting you do this anymore," Tony said, his voice sharp, almost breaking. "You're not spending another day mopping floors, Frank. You've given enough." Frank looked up, his weathered face confused but steady. "Tony, this is my life. I'm okay with it." But Tony shook his head, pacing the tiny room, the hum of the boiler filling the silence. "No, you're not. You're in pain. You can barely walk. And you're telling me your pension can't even cover rent? That's not okay. That's not right." Frank's eyes dropped to his coffee mug, the one with the chipped Brooklyn Dodgers logo. "What else am I gonna do? My daughter's got her own troubles in Chicago. I can't be a burden." Tony stopped pacing, his hands balling into fists. A burden? This man who'd spent 50 years protecting kids like Tony, who'd saved his dreams from the dumpster, was worried about being a burden? It was too much. Tony's mind was already spinning, the same way it did when he designed a new suit or cracked a tech puzzle. He was going to fix this, not just for Frank, but for every unsung hero like him. "Show me the school," Tony said suddenly, his voice firm. "Every corner, every broken piece you've been holding together. I want to see it through your eyes." Frank hesitated, then nodded, grabbing his broom like an old friend. They walked the halls of James Madison High School, Frank pointing out the cracks in the system. Leaky pipes he'd patched with hardware store parts, a computer lab with machines older than the students, a gym floor that creaked from years of neglect. "This place is falling apart," Frank said, his voice quiet but proud. "But I keep it going, for the kids." Tony listened, taking mental notes, his genius brain already building a plan. But it was Frank's stories that hit hardest. He talked about a girl who'd carved her initials into a windowsill, too shy to speak up in class, but now a doctor. A boy who'd hidden in the janitor's closet after his dad left, now a teacher himself. Frank didn't just clean. He saw people. He saved them. And Tony realized Frank had been saving him too, all those years ago, with every coffee, every quiet moment of protection. As they stood in the school's workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, Tony made a decision. "This stops now," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You're not invisible anymore, Frank. I'm gonna make sure the world sees you." Frank looked at him, his eyes searching, like he wasn't sure what to believe. But Tony was already moving, his phone buzzing with a text from Pepper about the gala he'd ditched. He ignored it. This was bigger than any gala, bigger than Stark Industries. This was personal. What would you do if you could repay someone who changed your life? Would you go all in, like Tony, or would you freeze, not knowing where to start? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what Tony does next. The climax. Tony Stark walked out of James Madison High School, the Brooklyn sunset casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. His mind was a storm. Frank Russo's stories, his battered knees, those sketches pulled from the trash, all swirling together. Frank had spent 50 years holding this school together, saving kids like Tony with quiet kindness. And what did he have to show for it? A paycheck that didn't cover rent, a body breaking down, and a daughter in Chicago he couldn't afford to visit. Tony's fists clenched. He wasn't just going to fix this for Frank. He was going to change everything. Back in his car, Tony pulled out his phone and called Pepper. "Cancel my week," he said, his voice like steel. "I need data on James Madison's budget, salaries, pensions, maintenance staff, and get me everything on Frank Russo, his work history, his pay, his medical records. Now." Pepper didn't argue. She knew that tone. Tony Stark was on a mission, and nothing was stopping him. By the time his jet touched down at LaGuardia, he had a plan. Not just a quick fix, but something big. Something that would make the world see people like Frank for the heroes they were. 3 weeks later, Tony was back at the school, this time with a team. Pepper, a lawyer, and 2 Stark Industries execs followed him through the blue doors. Kids whispered and pointed, their phones snapping pics, but Tony's eyes were locked on finding Frank. He found him in the gym, sweeping up after a basketball game, wincing with every step. "Frank!" Tony called, his voice echoing. The old janitor turned, his broom pausing mid-sweep. "You again?" Frank said, a half-smile breaking through. "Thought you forgot about me." Tony grinned, but his heart was pounding. "Not a chance. Come with me. We're meeting the principal." In the principal's office, Principal Janet Carter stood to greet them, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Stark, this is an honor," she said, shaking his hand. Tony waved it off. "This isn't about me, it's about him." He nodded at Frank, who looked uneasy in his faded janitor's uniform, like he didn't belong at the table. Tony pulled out a chair for him. "Sit, Frank. You're the reason we're here." Frank sat, his hands fidgeting, while Tony opened a folder and slid it across to Principal Carter. "I'm launching the Russo Foundation," Tony said, his voice steady but burning with purpose. "Starting with $100 million. The room went dead silent. Frank's jaw dropped. Principal Carter blinked, clutching the folder like it might disappear. "The foundations for the invisible heroes," Tony continued, his eyes locked on Frank. "Janitors, cooks, bus drivers, the people who keep schools running but never get a thank you. It's going to fund better wages, training, pensions. And we're starting right here, at James Madison." He turned to Frank, who was staring at the table, his eyes glistening. "Frank, I'm creating a new role, campus mentor. You'll teach kids practical skills, how to fix things, build things, think on their feet. No more sweeping floors. You'll have a real office, triple your current pay, full medical, including knee surgery. When you retire, your pension's based on this, not your janitor's salary." Frank's hands trembled. "Tony, why me?" he whispered. Tony leaned forward, his voice soft but fierce. "Because 50 years ago, you saw a kid who was drowning and threw him a lifeline. You saw me, now it's my turn." Principal Carter skimmed the folder, her voice shaking. "This is incredible, Mr. Stark. For Frank, for the school." Tony cut her off. "There's more. The foundation's renovating this place. New computer labs, a workshop, a tech center named the Russo Innovation Hub. Frank's ideas are in every blueprint. Frank's head snapped up, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. "You're naming it after me?" he choked out. Tony nodded, his own eyes stinging. "Damn right. Your name deserves to be something that lasts." Who's the unsung hero in your life? That one person who changed everything but never got the credit? Tell us in the comments and smash that subscribe button to see how this story ends. You won't believe what's coming. Resolution and impact. The auditorium at James Madison High School was packed, buzzing with students, teachers, and reporters. Camera flashes lit up the stage where Tony Stark stood next to Frank Russo, who looked like a different man. No more janitor's uniform, just a sharp gray suit, his knees healed from surgery, his steps steady for the first time in years. The crowd hushed as Tony stepped to the microphone, his usual smirk replaced by something deeper, something real. "Most of you know me as Iron Man," Tony began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But long before I was saving the world, I was just a kid in this school, getting knocked around, dreaming too big for my own good. And one guy saw me through it." He turned to Frank, whose eyes were already shining. Frank Russo. For 50 years, he kept this place running, cleaning floors, fixing leaks, saving kids like me without ever asking for a thing. Today, that changes. The crowd erupted as Tony announced the Russo Foundation's $100 million launch, cheering louder when he revealed the Russo Innovation Hub, a cutting-edge tech center built from Frank's ideas. "This isn't just a building," Tony said, holding up the yellowed sketches Frank had saved from the trash. "These are my designs from when I was 17, thrown out because I thought they were junk. Frank kept them. And guess what? They inspired a Stark Industries patent worth billions." He paused, his voice cracking. "Frank gets 5% of every dollar that tech makes. Millions for the rest of his life." Frank shook his head, tears streaming down his face as the auditorium roared. Tony wasn't done. The Russo Innovation Hub will teach kids to build, to fix, to dream, skills Frank's been passing down for decades. And Frank, he's the first campus mentor, showing these kids how to be heroes in their own way. Students jumped to their feet, chanting Frank's name. Frank, overwhelmed, stepped to the mic. "I'm no hero," he said, his voice shaky but strong. "I just did what felt right. You kids, you're my family. Always will be." Tony clapped a hand on Frank's shoulder, his eyes wet but proud. Later, in the quiet of the new tech center, Frank showed Tony a workbench he'd designed where kids were already building solar-powered gadgets. "You didn't just change my life," Frank said softly. "You changed theirs." Tony looked at the kids, then back at Frank. "You started it, Frank. I'm just finishing what you built." Months later, the Russo Innovation Hub was thriving, kids learning skills that could take them anywhere. Frank's daughter flew in from Chicago with her kids, paid for by the foundation, and Frank finally got to hug his grandkids without worrying about rent. Tony, he kept those sketches on his desk at Stark Industries, a reminder that the smallest acts, like a janitor believing in a kid, can change the world. What's the one act of kindness that changed your life? Share it in the comments. It's stories like yours that keep us going. And if this hit you as hard as it hit me, smash that subscribe button to catch more stories that'll make you feel something real.